Okay, shall we begin?
Okay, it's
Yeah, so good morning, everybody. Welcome to the SciTech Discourse Series, Episode 2, Era of Interlocking Crisis. Today's session is not a lecture, it is a conversation about the realities we are already living in, not as isolated environmental problems, but as systems that are deeply connected. So, when we talk about climate change, biodiversity loss, or environmental degradation, we often talk about them separately, but in reality, they are not separate. In fact, they are an interlocking systems of crisis. Changes in the land use affect biodiversity, biodiversity loss affect ecosystem resilience, and climate variability amplifies both. And often, the most important signals of these changes are not found in reports first. They're seen in the field. They are observed, noticed, and documented. And that's why in today's conversation is very important. It is my honor to introduce our speaker, Eric Navarro, a field-based wildlife photographer and independent ecological observer from the Philippines. Eric's work focuses on avian populations, landscape level biodiversity, long-term field observation, and through his documentation, guys, he has observed changes in bird distribution, seasonal shifts, habitat transformation, and the subtle but critical impacts of climate variability and land use change. His work is not based on theory alone, it is based on time, on presence, on watching ecosystems change slowly and sometimes abruptly. Eric, welcome to the SciTech Discourse series. We're honored to have you.
Thank you, thank you. It's an honor to be here, sir. And to
Yeah,
everyone who's watching, I hope you can learn something from my short experiences actually in
yeah.
the field.
Since you mentioned experiences, Eric, I want to start with your story. When did you begin observing nature this closely? And was there a moment, like a place, a species, an experience that made you realize that what you were seeing was basically changing? Can you tell us about that?
Sure, that's a great question to start our discussion. I really like sharing where I started this. Many people are asking, "Hey, I mentioned earlier you're a marine biologist, and then why is it like you do a lot of birding in the forest? Like it's kind of far from your profession, from the sea, and then you go to the mountains." So, it started when I was young, when I was a little boy. I grew up in I shared earlier that I grew up in Mindanao in South, so there's forested areas, green spaces in Tupi. Where I live, it's near at the foot of Mount Matutom. So Mount Matutom is the highest mountain in South Cotabato. The place there has a lot of green spaces, birds, small critters, and basically animals. It began when I started observing birds in our backyard. So I live in a compound where there are trees, lots of trees, large trees, and they are native trees. So my grandparents, they love planting native trees. So that's a fun fact. They love planting trees. And then I observed this tiny bird, a yellow bird that's carrying a nesting material. So I got curious about it. So basically, it's building a nest. So I'm observing it coming back and forth, gathering uh, these nesting materials. So that bird is a garden sunbird. So recently it just changed the name from the olive back sunbird. So it's distributed all over Asia, also extended its range to Australia. Anyway, so that's I started observing birds. I got really curious. Anong ginagawa ng bird na to? Why it's keep coming back and forth, gathering as materials. And then I tried following it, and then I saw, oh, it's building a nest. It's building a nest near in our window in a small garden. So from that day, I always observe it. Every time I when I woke up in the morning, I go there to the place and I observe what is happening. So it became my spark bird. So in bird watching, people have these jargons or have these terms. Sparkbird is where um why or how your birding or bird watching started. So that bird got you into that hobby. So the um garden sunbird. And then later on, I observed birds, not just that garden sunbird, but also I have observed that there are lots of birds in that small patch in our area. So I got curious, and then I asked my mom to buy me a small notebook, a pocket one, and then I have this pencil, and I started to write down the names. I don't know the English names that time, just the local names. For the sunbird, the local name is Tamsi, or in Bisaya, is Tamsi. So I wrote it down, and then I asked the adults what's the name of that bird. I said, that's Dicol, or that's Ticarol, the local names. And then every time I see one, I just put a mark on it, like just a tally, one, two. So every day I do it, or I have a free time, I do it. And then later on, I noticed during my observation time, so it took weeks and then 2 months at a very young age. And then I observed this particular bird that we call, in Tagalog it's tarat, but in other dialect, they call it dikol, they call it malipago. It's the brown shrike. So brown shrike, it's a migratory bird that's a visitor to the Philippines. So I observed that this brown shrike, um it's always on the same spot every day. So I always see it, and I always recorded it during that time. And then one time I was really curious why it disappeared so sudden. And then maybe it went to another place. So I tried for the next day. And then it was gone. Many weeks have passed. It was gone. I was really curious. So I don't know about my migration that time. And yeah, my curiosity grew everywhere. Or if I had the chance, I always see birds, not just the rare ones, just all birds start at a young age, and then up to now. So my experience in birding is not just a very, I cannot say that it's just a very short time, because it started when I was younger. Um yeah, I started young, and then hanggang ngayon. It's a journey, and it's keeps on growing. I'm learning every time I go birding.
I see. Well, that's a very, very good start, like, like where your curiosity started, something like
Mm.
that. And I can tell that when you were young, there's already a scientist spirit in you. When you mentioned that you ask around to buy a notebook for you to tally on the number of birds, and you ask about the name about it. I don't know if there are students basically do that at this very time, at this very point in time. A lot of basically students now, I think that's what we need more from them, that curiosity, to observe or something like that. So I have a follow through question on that, Eric. Have you noticed patterns over time, that things that were once common but are now rare? For example, like you mentioned earlier about you didn't know yet about migration. Now that you have already so much knowledge on migration, was there any patterns over time that you observed that very common before, but now, you when you were younger you can use to see it, but now it's kind of common now to see?
Yes, that's a good question, actually. Based on the experiences, yes, as we can see also in the internet, in social media, this is a first-hand experience where over time, I have observed lots of birds, and not just birds, but animals that now uncommon. or rare because of habitat degradation and I'm sorry about my background. This is um habitat degradation and the climate change. Um, we can see it in just a moment. I just deal with this
Sure, no
background.
worries, sir. No
I'm
worries at
sorry.
all. Yeah, while waiting with Mr. Eric, guys, basically, oh, this is a very good conversation with Eric Navarro because uh, it's not common to us. It's not a common knowledge that we can actually use birds basically to observe climate change, to observe weather, to observe season. We use it. Okay, so now we're back. Mr. Eric is back.
I'm sorry
You can
about
continue.
that.
No worries, Sir
Yes.
Eric. This is just a conversation. No problem at all. We anticipate that kind of events. So yeah, sorry, can you continue? You left us on the question about have you noticed patterns over time that things that were once common but are now kind of rare to see?
Yes. Before I would like to start like before of that, like from common to rare. So there are like two things that I have observed in the course of my experiences or our experiences with the team, with the birds. It's on, for example, birds that they adapted because of the changes in their environment or in their habitat. So this will fall into resilience. And then versus the species that really affected or cannot cope up with the changes that will fall into vulnerability. So that will fall where the common or like from the common birds that they become rare these days. So there are species that we can observe that they're supposed to be on the low elevation areas, but now they are widespread to the higher elevations, which is a big problem because they will compete with the other species there. So why is it? Why is it like it's happening? Because of the pressure that is pushing them to go up because of for example land use, um agriculture, or um illegal logging, some of and others that are destroying their habitat below, so they've been pushed up, and then they have this competition with the birds in that kind of area, which they are really resilient, no? They can adapt. But how about those birds that cannot adapt? For example, the seabirds. You have mentioned earlier that you want to adapt an area in Cavite. Many years ago, Cavite is a great area for shorebirds, for marine birds, basically. It's a stopover for birds um, that go migrate from north to south during winter. So they feed there in the mud flats in Manila Bay, in Nabotas, in Cavite, those areas in areas. So with the developments, the urbanization, land conversion. So for example, they are making airports, they're making buildings, bridges. So these habitats are being converted into man-made structures, which is originally feeding grounds for these birds. So these birds expected when they come to land to feed to fuel up from their journey, nawala na. So the mudfloods are gone. This will affect them. Some may die, some may become disoriented, and this will really affect their population. And we know that everything is connected, right? Also, we can tell that the climate is changing because of birds, because of the change of their behavior. So we can observe patterns and changes because of that. I don't know if you have seen in the internet or some people post about a large of congregation of birds in Jansan, also in Coronadal City and other parts, the swallows. Um, these are migratory birds, a mix of barn and Pacific swallows. They are great example of climate change indicators because they really migrate in time by a signal of changing weathers or atmospheres. So they congregate in cities. That's normal actually because they are adapting. What ang hindi normal is when they arrive late. Usually they arrive around September and leave March and April or early April. It's um it's kind of serious when they arrive late because of the changes in patterns of the climate because they depend on the climate to like hey signal hey you go now it's cold you go south and then so they depend on that and also because of that they know that the food is abundant for that place. So like insects, they are really what you call that? They are really waiting for the season like to emerge. So there are season for insects dependent. They're dependent to the temperatures to the climate also. So the swallows and then the insects um they are connected. So the birds know when the insects will emerge. So when the insects emerge early and then the swallows arrive late, so that's a disaster as well. When the birds arrive early and then the insects arrive late, that's also a problem. These are caused by climate change. And we can see in the city, many people are asking, why are they on the cities? So ito yung mga tanong nila. Basically, the question why. City is it's a great place for them to roost. First is um we city have this good microclimate. Microclimate is when we say it's a small area or an area, specific area in a place where there's a specific climate because of maybe trees, it's maybe of a hill, because maybe of a near body of water, something like that. So it's favorable for them because it's a bit warmer. So the birds need warm for them to regulate their temperature and also for not to lose energy when traveling. Cities also provide safe harbor for them. So the wires, the lines, have you observed they're on the electrical wires. So they congregate there because it's easier to congregate there and also safer for them because no cats or no other predators can go there. Also, they congregate there because of um, bird predators cannot attack them. That's the illusion effect where they congregate so that the predators will become confused. And then cities provide food for them, plenty of food because cities have lights, artificial lights. So lights attract insects. So the birds go there because they have food. And if we go back many years ago, those cities are not occupied with houses and buildings. They are occupied with reeds. They are marshes. They are trees and other maybe grasslands. So the lines and other structures there are substituted by I mean the area, the marsh, the reeds are substituted by the lines. That is why the birds are there. And then we have seen throughout the years of observation that before we can have hundreds of thousands of birds in just a single block, as just a single street. But this time we have a large drop, a huge drop on the population of that. Maybe because of the food, maybe because of the weather, the pattern, and there's a lot of factors affecting them and during their migration. And for the common birds, I mean common birds, not we cannot say common, but we can say we can see them often. Um, but I can give an example with that. For example, in the south, okay, in the south, um, I have this or we have this research in this particular bird. It's in Tiboli, so it's Tiboli sunbird. So it's a nectar feeding bird. Basically, sunbirds they feed on nectars. So they rely on flowers. So when we talk about flowers, flowers or trees that bear flowers, they rely on weather, right? On climate. So they rely on the weather when they bloom. So there's a specific time. So before we've been documenting this bird and other birds that feed on nectar. Um, every time we visit the area, we see it always. So it's 100% guaranteed that we can see the bird and we can document its usual activities. But over time, because of the the major issue or the major concern there is the access road. The access road is really helpful because we can travel across. It can cut um, time, resources to move goods and to travel. So we have benefits of the road. But because of the road, it is drawing a lot of attention from people to buy lands, to convert this land into maybe a vacation house, maybe a resort, something like that. So the forest there is really affected. So the course of time, the change is really rapid. It's really fast, and the trees being cut down, the flowering trees are gone. Oh, the usual feeding stations were gone as well. So it's kind of hard to spot the birds on their feeding stations because of the changes. And then because of that, the microclimate also changed. And then the climate change also is affecting them. So longer periods of drought, longer periods of rain. So there's a change on the cycle of blooming of these flowering trees, which also affects other birds. So it's a cycle. It's a connection where birds that are commonly seen in the area are a bit harder to find now. So there are lots of examples on that we can observe. Like people can observe. Maybe we the good example to ask is the older people.
Mm-hmm.
They can share like
Yeah.
um way back when I was younger or 20 years ago, this place is teeming with trees. I can remember there are lots of birds there. There are lots of fruit-bearing trees, and they will tell you stories that make you wonder. Oh, I hope I can see them. I really hope that people didn't change these places, and I can also share with that my grandparents. So we have this parcel of we have this land, a small land near it Matutom, where um you used to have large trees. And then I asked my grandparents about when they were younger about the place. They shared to me that there were parrots there. So we have endemic parrots, not just the hanging parrot, the small ones that's also adapting in urban life, but the big ones that we call pikoy, so the large parrots that are present in the area. But it's sad that it's not present anymore, maybe due to the pressure of poaching because of illegal pet trade and then habitat destruction. Also, hunting, it's still present now. People hunting for meat, and then yeah, illegal pet trade. It's a really big issue in Southeast Asia actually. for birds, especially songbirds. Parrot, songbirds for pet.
Yeah. So, Sir Eric, you mentioned a lot of points. Actually, you are already quite, answering some of the parts of the questions that I would later ask you. But I just want a little bit to go back to your main
Okay,
points
it's
earlier
okay.
from the
Uh-huh.
very beginning. That's quite very technical, and I think there are teachers listening with us right now, and for sure they would also be very interested about the first point that you raised about the birds go to basically uplands because of the pressure. You mentioned that earlier.
Yes,
Can
yes.
you can you tell us more about it? Because how does it work? Because for me, I cannot explain that. I mean, like, I understand that they might probably go to the uplands, but um, how does it exactly work? Why birds basically go there?
Okay, that's a good question. To explain it, let's give an example. For example, there are birds or animals that live in a lower elevation, or we can say near or on the level of the sea. So where for example in Davao or where you live now, and in a low elevated area. So there are birds that are living there. Let us say 20 years ago. 20 years ago, there's no development in the area. Just native trees, green spaces. So birds thrive there. And then 5 years later, investors or people grab the land. So they cut down the trees. They converted the land into homes, subdivisions, or um, farming, or like they planted coconut trees, bananas, or any other crops. So the animals there and then birds, they don't have green spaces anymore. So their food is gone. Um, they cannot breed there basically because there's no food, there's no mate. And then because of this pressure, they have to find another green pastures. So they need to move. So, for example, all of the lower elevated areas are being occupied. So, um, the people or down below are pressuring them to go up. So they are moving. So it's not a sudden or like they move from the low to the top. So but they are being pushed to go up to find more resources because there's no places to go. So because of that, we can find birds that are supposed to be on the lower elevation that are now on the higher elevation that are competing with the birds on that specific area, which is also a concern because of competition of food, lack of resources. And then yeah, that is what I mean. They are pushed. For example, I can give an example of a bird. Some songbirds, for example, the bulbuls. Bulbuls are songbirds. They are really resilient birds. So they are basically in lowlands and they are pushed to higher elevations because of the habitat destruction or the pressure from down below.
Yeah, very good point, Sir Eric. Um, So it's not only people basically migrate, no, from
Yes, yes.
lower land to
So
highland basically. Yeah, so
yes, the
there are,
highlands.
yeah, so also the same way with how other you know uh animals moved as
Mhm.
well.
Yes.
So okay, now I got the point there. Um you mentioned a little bit earlier about birds that basically migrate from one place to another. Were there enough documentation of these birds that, for example, these birds used to visit here every summer, for example, or every um, rainy season, for example? Were these changes behavior or visit in the Philippines of this kind of birds, were they properly documented as far as your
Yes.
knowledge is concerned?
Yes, yes, yes. Um, this topic is good. I mean, dito papasok yung citizen science. where citizen science is really important to contribute on the data. Our scientists, our researchers, our biologists, they are really doing a good job on research and documenting species and documenting changes and other science stuff, you know. Um, but these people, the researchers, the scientists, they are not on the field always because they're also busy doing other jobs. And then there are people we call the hobbyists
Uh-uh.
or the citizen scientists that can really help us on this because they're on the field always. So it's a good tandem between the scientists and the citizen scientists. So it doesn't mean like you have a different profession. You cannot go bird watching or collect
Okay.
data. Yes. If, for example, I'm a marine biologist and I am doing bird watching on the terrestrial land. So it's okay. It's totally fine.
Mm-mm.
You're contributing
Mm.
a lot of data. And
Mm-mm.
in the Philippines, not just in the Philippines, but all over around the world, the data in bird is really documented well because of these people photographing birds, visiting areas, and then trying to observing them and then reporting them in a local database, maybe just posting on Facebook or contributing online. There are platforms online where you can share your data. I can share an example about you asked about an observation, a decline over time because of this pressure. Uh, let's go localize here in Davao. So here in Davao, there's a specific place where there's a bird that migrates from north down to south because of migration. So it's the Japanese heron. It's a rare bird actually. But nowadays it's become really it's more rare because of the pressure of um changes. There's a place here that many years ago, a few years ago, we can see them just roaming around in the area, maybe 10 or more or less 20 of them in the area. But during this, maybe 3 years ago, started 3 years ago or 5 years ago, there's a rapid decline on that. And it's really hard to see them now in the area. We tried visiting them, and it's really hard to see one, just one bird. It's really hard to see one. Um, Maybe because of hunting. These are large birds. So maybe people are tempted to hunt them because they are really they are ground they stay on the ground, they just stay still, they walk. They're nocturnal birds actually. Um so in that area we documented more than 10 or more or
Mm.
less 20 birds in the area. But now it's so sad to have seen only one or maybe zero.
Yeah.
So there's a rapid decline because of that. Also maybe the climate affecting them to migrate. But
Mm-mm.
we can see it as the people trying to hunt them because it's
Mm-mm.
like easy to shoot them during the daytime because they just stay still there. It's sad to see the changes over time. And also there are mud flats in General Santos City. So you live in General Santos City.
Mm-mm.
In General Santos City, we have good mud flats there, but because of um, lots of activities, lots
Mm-mm.
of disturbances, many shorebirds and migratory birds now are gone. So
Mm.
before we have documented lots of species there. We
Yeah.
counted 40, 60 or more species in a
Wow.
single visit. But now it's hard to document. Some are gone, some are reclaimed, the lands are reclaimed, some are developed, and also the pressure on land dispute. You can also note that the dispute on land and grabbing. So it's hard to document because of the risk.
Yeah.
You put your life documenting them. But during the course or like the time we document birds, we always do our best to contribute data
Mm.
because we can see through time if the decline or the steady population or there's an increase in the population. So citizen science is really a key. Is this platform, this what we are doing right now is a really big help to raise awareness to people. Um, just sharing on social media your observation, you took a photo, and then you
Mhm.
have seen this. This will help people to have curiosity, and then to have um something to think about, like, oh, we have this bird, I have seen this, but it's gone, something like. Citizen science is for everyone, actually.
Yeah. That's a very good point, Sir Eric, because like you mentioned about citizen science, no, and I think I can see actually a lot of
Mm.
Facebook groups that have this initiative to ID species, for example. Like
Yes.
they take photo of it and then they would say like, can you ID this if someone basically do not know what the name of this specific species. Um, that's a very good point. I'm very into citizens science knowledge and production of knowledge because I think it's a wrong idea that scientist or science is distributed to a specific person. I think we all are
Yes.
scientists. I mean,
Scientists.
yeah,
Yes.
we should be because we cannot just let scientists like a PhD or someone a master's person to be just uh, someone who is able to document this. I mean, you need the community to help you, like spread information, document all of this stuff. So that's a very good point, Sir Eric. Actually, I will just move on to some of the questions because you have mentioned already I mean, you have mentioned a lot of answer to these questions prepared for you, but I have this very interesting question for you, Sir Eric, because I think when my team knew that I'll be interviewing you, there are a couple of questions that they want to raise
Okay.
actually.
Mm-hmm.
And it's clear now you have established the question, which is what is happening, and you mentioned about climate change, pressure, something like that, that basically made this species or this bird moved from one place to another. But Sir Eric also mentioned earlier about some of the birds basically crossed cities and they basically like get their food in there. Micro, you mentioned about micro something
Microclimate.
earlier.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, microclimate, something like that. I went across 2024, if I'm not mistaken. I went across to this study from Nature, and for sure you have read this, or you might probably have heard about this, or you might probably have read a lot of literature about this. Um, that study, I forgot the title, but basically it talks about how cities actually changes the pattern of birds because of the artificial light,
Yes.
and these birds basically wake up in a wrong timing because they have thought that the light of the cities basically they seen it as a sunlight as a
Ah,
signal
yes.
for them to time for them to migrate or to move to another place. So, um, do you think how can we coexist at the same time with the development from this? Well, as a scientist, as a bird scientist, how do you see this kind of like this kind of events? Like the birds basically have to cross cities, and the city have to develop at the same time.
Okay, that's a really good and a also a nice question. First, we cannot stop progress or development. So as we grow, as our demands grow, also developments is there. We cannot stop the people from um, the development of streets or like building structures, something like that. It's a challenging part also when we talk about the you mentioned about the lights as the artificial lights that are disorienting the birds, the migratory birds. We can cite an example in the US. This is also a huge, not just in US but in general. Um, Migratory birds when they cross through the US, there we know that there's like many cities in the US with light pollution, bright lights. So birds are become disoriented and then they go down because of that. Um, People there or like cities there have these movement or these advocacies that um they time or when they know the season of birds, they they dedicated a time or a day or a night where they turn off their lights so that the birds can safely pass through. And then others also doing that as well. And not just the lights that are affecting the birds, also the windows or the glass. Birds cannot see glass or windows. So yes, birds die when they strike the glass or windows. It's a really big concern. It's a common problem during migration and then with the birds that when they collided with windows to buildings, they die. So imagine like they're flying at a high speed and then they bumped into the buildings to the windows. They die immediately. So that's a really big problem. And we also recorded bird collisions. Here in the Philippines, we have a dedicated team. We have this group that are documenting bird collisions as well. So yeah, progress or development, we cannot stop that, unfortunately. But we can do just a simple act to help these birds, like for example, bright lights, turning in them off during the migrating season. I don't know here in the Philippines if there are cities there here that are doing that during migration. But in the US and I have heard also in Japan, some of the cities during migration that they are turning off their lights for just maybe an hour or a period of time in the night so that the birds will not become disoriented because it's really a problem because birds are disoriented and then become disrupted during their flight time.
Yeah, very good, Eric. I think I will not move little. I will not be quickly on. I will not be moving quickly on the next question. I just want to
Okay.
follow through that because that's a very interesting point in there. It might be a little bit of like a technical question, or maybe like you find it a silly question at the same time.
That's okay.
But since I'm not very knowledgeable about it, so how birds use how do they use navigation? I mean, like, how do they navigate? I mean, like birds, since I'm not knowledgeable on how do they do it, like how birds would know where to go, basically where to pass through.
Yes, that's a good question. Birds, they navigate through, we know that the Earth has its magnetic poles, right? So they use that the magnetic fields to navigate. Also, it's kind of like when we, for example, a computer, like it's a program, it's programmed with them. So also um with the help of the climate, with the help of the weather, they know where to go. So that is where it's really important to discuss about climate change because climate change can really affect their navigation. So just like the old, um, just like the old sailors in the ancient times, they rely on the stars, they rely on the position of the sun and the moon. Birds also rely on the positions of the celestial bodies as well, and through the magnetic fields of the Earth. So with this disruption over time, caused by the effects of Anthropocene or the human activities, it's really hard for the birds to go. Like for example, climate change create heavy rainfalls or they create storm or strong typhoons or cyclone, something like that. So birds, when they fly, they get blown away. Um, of course, so they got lost, or something like that. They become disoriented. So climate change is a really huge factor on birds in the Chatham. So they rely on the sun, rely on the moon, the stars. They rely on the magnetic field of the Earth, and it's with them. Like they know where to land. They would know what time. They know about the signal from the climate. Like, oh, it's time to go. It's time to breathe. It's time to go south. It's time to go back.
Well, a very technical part there for Eric, and I think a lot of viewers now are like, "Oh, like how does it happen?" So you mentioned about what do you call this, magnetic field, right? So I think at least for me, I knew a little bit about it. Like magnetic field helps them basically to move, and uh, it helps the bird to for migration basically. So this might be a little controversial, Sir Eric. I have a question here that a little bit controversial, and this has been very, this has been very uh, a lot. I mean, like this has been very discussed by from people, and probably this has been debunked by your team, by the same people as you are doing a lot of stuff about it. But are birds really helpful in detecting, for example, earthquake, like this kind of phenomena?
Oh, hello. Okay, my connection is lost.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a great question. Birds are really sensitive in the atmosphere. Birds can, it's a, it's part of them where, part of their evolutionary traits where they evolve or sensing their environment. So birds, for example, they roost at night, so they rest. They can sense if there's predator that is present because there's a change in the atmosphere. So birds can detect that, which I have shared earlier that they know when to migrate. For example, the swallows, because of the change of atmosphere, like, hey, it's getting colder, let's go south. So they detect that. So when when we talk about the other calamities like the earthquakes or the volcanoes, um there's always a change in atmosphere also with that. But when we say about earthquakes, it's I haven't read a literature about that they can detect earthquakes because like we cannot detect earthquakes because of also we don't have devices or tools that can detect earthquakes. But in terms of rapid change or sudden change in atmospheres, on the atmospheric pressure, the birds can detect it. Like we can see in the movies, for example, there's a disaster or like a volcano will erupt or a tidal wave or whatsoever. The birds like they go around, they fly in a large group. It's actually true because they can detect the pressure. For example, there will be a strong typhoon that will come. So birds can detect that. So they will move. They move away from that place. Also like in a volcanic eruption. So maybe because of they become disturbed while in the area because of the trembling of the volcano or the area or um maybe the forests are being or is shaking so the birds can move. Yes, but on the earthquake side, I'm not sure about if they can detect the earthquake, but birds are really sensitive with the sudden change in their environment. That's a really fun fact about birds. That is why birds are really good bioindicators in change of environment.
Yeah, very good point, Eric. I think just basically, would it be fair to say that there's a need for us to do research about it, like to test the hypothesis in the field of bird observatory? Basically, is this something that we should still consider to? I mean, like, is it because there are students listening with us right now? I mean, is it something for them to basically might consider when they go to the master's degree program? Do you think, as a scientist who've been working on this kind of stuff, do you think it's worth it I mean, it's worth it to push through to that area, basically.
Okay. Um, that's where science comes in. Science is curiosity. As long as you're curious, as long as you want to know the answer, um, you can try. If you have an idea, you can do it. As long as you know what you're doing, as long as you have enough data, as long as you have the resources, then you can push through it. Science is not just limited to a specific thing, or it will stop you there. As long as you have this idea and the people that can help you. So
Yeah.
if you want to study birds that can detect earthquake, then go. You can do that.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because there are students that actually starting to be curious about it. Because you mentioned earlier about community science, something like that, and somehow a little bit the the observation coincides with what's happening on the ground. And I think science says we cannot neglect this observation, but we need science as a tool to test the hypothesis, right? And yeah, I
Yes,
think
yes.
that's a very good point of view. I only have one more question, and then we will go
Okay.
later, Sir Eric, on the last section, which is the solution part, probably that we can discuss about it. So, um, I am quite familiar with Charles Darwin. He's one of my favorites, basically, because I'm
Yes.
a science guy also. I'm very
Yes.
curious, specifically biology. And we all know Charles Darwin is very famous in his work on natural selection, right?
The selection.
Yeah, and basically, I have been following the works of the two scientists studying Galapagos Island, basically. So Galapagos Island, on that study, they found out that the birds type of species changes based on the climate pattern. And when there is a season, for example, that it's a hot season, for example. So the number of this species also decline. And then, that the species that cannot, that make food for them scarce. So it would be hard for them to get this food at this specific season. So scientists found out that when that season came into that island, basically the number of that species declined. And there's another form of species basically get into the, like majority of them survived, like a big beak or something like that. It depends on the environment that basically make them thrive to change. Now, from your work, Sir Eric, you've been doing this for quite long time ago. Um, did you observe this kind of activities or this kind of phenomena that the type of bird change from when did you basically um, observe them? Was there any literature that you have read that, oh, I thought this area should be full of this kind of species, and then when you get there, you have seen different type of species or something like that. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, that's a good discussion you have shared about the Galapagos Island in Ecuador, about the evolution. So basically, they evolve because they adapt to changes, basically because of changes, whether environment, whether the pressure or what else, because there's changes in the environment. It's true that birds rely heavily on the climate in breeding. So climate change, I just want to add, climate change really will impact the breeding of the birds. For example, longer periods of droughts. So the birds cannot breed, cannot have nests because drought can affect their food. It can affect the quality of their offspring. It can affect the maybe it's hard for them to find nesting materials. So the birds, they need to breed the exact time where the climate or the weather is favorable with them. So the longer period of droughts, the longer periods of rainy season or cold uh, season, birds cannot breed. So decline the population, as you have mentioned, and then some birds have evolved through time because of that. Um, for example, there are birds that really adapt to change. One I can cite again is the swallows, the one that are congregating in the cities. Basically, they are insectivores, so they eat a lot of bugs. They eat flying insects. But during those times, during dry season or like there's a scarcity of food, there are literatures that also observe them that they eat um, fruits. So it's kind of weird. They are insectivores, but they eat fruits. Yes, because of there's not enough food, or I mean there's not enough food available. So they adapted to that lifestyle in order for them to survive. So this there's a lot of birds as well that that are shifting their diet, their behavior, their foraging patterns because of changes, and because they need to survive. They have to pass on their genes to the next generation. They have to breed so that their species will thrive. But because of the changes, not just on the area but also in the environment pressure, um, they they move. They need to adapt. Some species adapt because they're resilient, and it's sad that some species cannot adapt because they are vulnerable.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Eric. I think I will let it at that there. That point of view that you have mentioned a lot, the technicalities of birds, how do they move, how do they navigate, and why is it important to understand the navigation of birds. So we are on the last part now of the interview. So you have mentioned a lot of things about what is happening actually, Sir Eric. You mentioned about the ecosystems right now. You mentioned a lot of technicalities, how birds basically are being affected by development, and then you also technically mentioned about why is it happening. You have answered this question that climate variability, the land use change, like that um, a lot of developments happening on the lowland that birds have to move to highland because of you mentioned the human activity, which is like the Anthropocene. You mentioned about it, and
Yes.
I like that you mentioned that. And you also talked about how all of these activities interact with in the field, basically. And you also mentioned quite a bit on who is affected, basically, like um, the birds specifically, and at the same time, for sure, the biodiversity, the flora and fauna would still be affected. So they are interconnected, right? You mentioned that earlier, and that's a very good point in there. So I think section 4, the last section that I'll be asking with you, Sir Eric, is quite very important, and I think this is need for us to highlight this part because you already give understanding. You've give a lot of information, and this video, this podcast might reach a lot of
Mm.
people. No, we don't know. It would probably reach a lot of local officials, something like that. Now the last part is what can be done. You know, because you have mentioned community science, you have mentioned Anthropocene, which is a lot of human extraction now doing, have been done in our community. And it's kind of hard now to observe these birds, these migratory birds. And, for me, I think coexistence is very important information for people now to learn and to live with. So, what can be done with this? Because you've raised a lot of, good points earlier, community science, but how can we do it basically, like especially the students? You might probably give us an insight about what can students do for this, and what can educators like teachers do for this, and specifically the local communities in playing and responding to these changes.
Yes, thank you. That's a good point. It's a good discussion. How can we deal with the problem? So if there's a problem, how can we How can we think, or what are the solutions? Well, again, progress is we cannot stop it. Development, we cannot stop it. Only thing we can do is coexist with them. Yes. Community is a key. It's really important in conservation because it's there. The community is the local in the area. So they're the ones who will act as guardians of maybe a remaining refuge for the birds, for the students, or for like people that are interested to document. They can contribute to the data with just simple bird watching or birding, short for birding. They can contribute to the local database, or they can share photos. Um, for example, they can share a photo to the social media, and then people will see it. Oh, it's a beautiful bird, and then they become aware. And then at school, we can teach about the birds, basic about birds, or like we have this kind of birds in our area, so that we can reach other people who are, for example, catching birds for illegal pet trade or hunting birds. Just a basic information and education drive can help people to become more aware about the birds, or not just the birds, but other animals around them, and about the destruction or the development of land. When we talk about land, let's be honest, like we cannot stop um, large companies or people from the land. It's a really huge concern. For example, the mining industry, the logging, and other structures like maybe factories or something like that. But we can do is we can build remaining or intact lands um, as a refuge for these birds. As we mentioned earlier, that they're resilient birds, and birds can adapt. So they move from place where it's suitable for them. This I can share my recent trip, where we know that China or Hong Kong is a really well-developed place with technology, with
Mm.
buildings, with with their um, progress and development. I have observed uh, in Hong Kong and in Macau that they have green spaces there. So they dedicated parks in inside the urban, where we can see a lots of buildings surrounding those parks. But inside the park or the area, there's a lot of birds actually. Not just more common birds, but birds that they thrive on regionally on the mountains or on the forested areas. But they coexist there with the urban, with the people. And with the rapid development, the government there or the people there dedicated a land, a reserve, where people cannot touch the area. So it's basically for the flora and fauna. And then for the people to enjoy it, they have placed um paths there or trails for nature lovers to go hike and to see the nature. So um we can see there that the people and the wildlife interact and they coexist, where there are places for development and there are places for wildlife. This maybe we can achieve that here in the Philippines. I don't know when, but we have nature reserves here. We have our last strongholds here for conservation, and that's what our team is doing in South. So the Lantau Wildlife Conservancy, with our team leader, Alan Barredo. Sir, if you're watching this, thank you for your dedication. Um, in the South part, the development there is really huge. So lots of cutting of trees, development into infrastructures. But the team, or Sir Alan, managed to have an area, a large portion of area that he's guarding, where safe refuge for birds. So it's a land where the birds can rest without any worry from destruction, or like they have food there. So like that's the Lanta Wildlife Conservancy has been doing on the south, helping the birds. So yeah, it's a goal that we can coexist with the wildlife, as I have seen also in my past travels outside the Philippines, that they have dedicated places for wildlife, and only for wildlife, and this is for development. I hope the Philippines and other ASEAN countries will do as well. But the Philippines is also doing a really good job on
Mm-mm.
in the conservation, because I can remember before, the birding community in the Philippines is just a really small community. I can just count people who are doing bird watching. But now we have lots of members here, citizen scientists who are contributing, and more people are drawn, more people are aware
Mm.
of the changes, more people are aware of what birds we have, what wildlife we have here in the Philippines. And this
Yeah.
is really a good start, like more people. And then also children, also
Mm.
students are getting involved and doing their um, studies. Actually, there's many students from senior high school, and then colleges are reaching out and asking for help on the research on birds. And I was surprised because they're asking for help on the research in urban birds and then local birds. And this is a really good start for them to raise awareness locally. And these studies are being done within their locality or within their community. So this is really would help also for students. Just a simple act like waste segregation, something like that, or being mindful with the environment, or just a small step that can help with the environment. It will really help save what we have and for the next generation.
Yeah, very good point for Eric. No, so we're on um the last part of our interview, and you've mentioned a lot of things. I know for sure people now is getting like hyped. They're hyped with what you have
I
mentioned a while ago. Yeah, I think, and actually we're getting a lot more viewers right now, and uh so Rick, you mentioned about like Hong Kong, China, something like that. So, uh, the same as mine, I also travel, and then like I can see that, you know, other countries, for example, Singapore and
oh yes,
Thailand,
Singapore.
yeah,
Yes,
they respect
Singapore.
nature. I don't know if you would agree with me. These countries respect nature. I mean, you
Yes,
can see their urban development that they really put somewhere in that development that they make sure that there is something that like given for the nature side, and at the same
yes,
time
green
they
spaces.
integrate, right? The best example here is Singapore. So when
Singapore,
you go to
yes.
Singapore, you can really say that um city and development in nature can be best friends, like you can really see there. And in um I went to Morocco. Morocco
Yes,
every
Morocco.
summer it's so hot. And when I was walking on the walk path, there is this big tree that um they use it, the tree, basically to people that when you walk you have shade. So the
Yes,
tree, they cut it according to the maybe the average height of people in there, and then they cut it so that people who will walk, who would bike, like they're shaded. And then at the same time, the trees there, I've noticed, bear fruits. So probably, if someone would want to eat or nothing to eat, they can just take it from there.
yes,
So I can see there that it is really possible to coexist, I just had my field study in Borneo, Sir Eric.
Yes.
I can see there that people really do not just exist because of what they want, but they respect the nature, the creatures, the flora and fauna in there, and then they know when to harvest, they know when not to harvest, and they basically know when is the right time not to get. Yeah, because they understand the science of these flora and fauna when basically to recuperate. When is the time for the nature to, bear fruit again, to be ready to serve, something like that. So they do not treat nature as, like to treat people, but they basically respect nature as a source of their food, basically. And yeah, I think it's a very good point there that you have mentioned. And maybe Sir Eric, we let you go, you can give a parting message for the listeners we have right now, and maybe you can a little bit insert this question on what is one habit people can start today to become more aware of ecosystem, and then you can have your parting message to all of us.
Okay, thank you. Um, First, really grateful for this opportunity to become part of this podcast for the episode 2. um, Bird discussion, conservation, climate change. We can talk about this all day. It's a really broad topic, so just shorten it up for this discussion. I'm sorry if I missed some points, but if for the viewers, if you have questions or if you have research, you can reach out. I am open to help you as long as I can, or based on my experience and knowledge as well. You can contact Sir Josh. Yes, I'm open for collaboration as well. Um, with this, we can start by being curious by attending on this session. This is a start, actually. This is a start. It started with a seed, where later on, when we nurture the little seed, it will grow into a large tree. That doesn't mean if you are an educator by profession, you are an engineer, you are a you're an IT, or you're a virtual assistant, or whatever profession you have now, you cannot contribute to the change. Everything or everyone can contribute and must contribute, because we exist as one. We live in this planet. It is connected, interconnected, and we really depend on what we have, on our resources. And we start by being observant. We start by being aware of what is happening to the environment. Um, we should avoid the saying like, we have too many of that. It's just a little change. But this little change will pile up. These little changes soon will become a very, very huge problem. It's what they say, prevention is better than cure. It's We must prevent things that might happen in the future. Then it will happen, and then it's too late for us to cure it, because when it will happen, it's happening. Climate change is happening. It's really fast. For the students, you can um, be more friendly to nature. It's a simple act: planting trees, um, taking trash, or being responsible with the trash. Also, helping your friends by sharing, hey, I've attended this, hey, we can attend this, or going on a club. Also, I invite everyone to go on a hike, to see the nature around them. That is where we can see that, wow, we have this world, or we have not just the city, or not just our urban community, but we have outside, like the forest, thing like that. Also, we can contribute to the local scientists by sharing on the social media, by sharing to the people we know that are doing research. Um, People that are doing bird watching or have observed birds that are, we can say, rare or new record, they're really helpful to us because you can track wildlife over time because of their records. Because yeah, for example, Sir Joss, you are not always on the field. I'm not on the field um, always. So like other people can also help us with data. So yeah, again, if they have questions or they need help on their research, I might help them. Also, I have friends that can help them as well, not just here in the Philippines but also outside. Um, be more respectful with the nature. That is also the key. The nature is our friend. It's not our enemy. So like people will say, because nature give us strong winds, they give us strong rains and give us typhoons or cyclones. Well, basically we did that. we we altered the change. We changed the course of the weather or the climate. So that's the consequences of what we are doing. But it's not too late. It's not too late, and we can act, just a simple act. We can do more, and we can hope and really hope that people will not fall to apathy or like they will lose the interest. Like there's no hope. There's still hope. And yeah, thank you for your time. Thank you for the listeners. And yeah, that's for me.
Yeah, thank you, Sir Eric. Yeah, I think, I get reminded of this quote that nature can exist without human, but human cannot exist without nature.
Yes.
So we need to exist with nature, and nature would be willing for sure to coexist with us,
Yes.
and we're part of the system. So yeah, we invited people who are watching us right now. If you wanted to invite Sir Eric for a talk, for a technical report or something like that, you want to reach him out. He's very active on his social media on Facebook, and if you wanted to reach him, you can email us, and then we can direct your email to Sir Eric, basically. And you can also directly message him for sure on his social media
Yes.
accounts.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I
thank you,
so
Sir
I
Eric.
also Yes, I also have like other platforms like
Yeah. Please
I have my
announce.
Instagram where I post my photos or field observations as well. They can visit that. Yeah, Facebook. I'm always online in Facebook, email, and in other platforms.
Yeah. Thank you. Today we were reminded that to understand planet, we must learn to observe it not just through data, but through attention, through patience, and through presence. Eric, thank you for grounding this conversation in real experience. To everyone here listening with us, the question is no longer what is happening, but what are we noticing? Because what we notice shapes what we choose to protect. This has been your host, Joshua Vidal, and thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you again in the next SciTech Discourse episode. Thank you so much, Eric, and to
Thank
everyone
you.
watching us.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, have a great day.
Have a great day. Bye.